Hello, everyone. Tonight, relax with a bedtime story designed to calm your thoughts and guide you into deep rest. Through gentle storytelling, we weave history together, uncovering hidden truths behind famous figures of the past, all to the warm glow of a crackling fire. Perfect for drifting into sleep, with the soft sounds of the fireplace and soothing tales that carry you into a peaceful night's rest.
Nefertiti, the lady who shone like the sun. In the long history of ancient Egypt, the names of powerful women still resonate: Hatshepsut, Tausit, and Cleopatra. Yet few have inspired as much mystery and debate as Queen Nefertiti. She was not merely the wife of the eccentric pharaoh Akhenaten, but a partner in rule and a central figure during one of the most turbulent intellectual and political moments in Egyptian history. Her influence has continued to fascinate scholars, where myth and fact intertwine, and where religious symbolism merges with political reality. Mysterious origins. The first puzzle in Nefertiti's story lies in her origin. Her name in ancient Egyptian means "the beautiful one has come," a phrase that deepens the mystery of her identity. But from where did this beautiful one come? Some scholars argue she was purely Egyptian, perhaps the daughter of a noble close to the royal court. The strongest theory suggests she was the daughter of a powerful statesman who would later rule Egypt after Tutankhamun's death. This would explain her strong influence and rapid rise. Others propose she was not Egyptian at all, but of foreign origin, perhaps from Mitanni in northern Syria, or from another Near Eastern kingdom that had diplomatic ties with Egypt. Evidence for this comes from the Amarna letters, which describe royal marriages arranged between Egypt and foreign dynasties. If true, Nefertiti's marriage to Akhenaten was not only personal, but also a symbol of international alliance. Yet, no definitive proof has ever been found. Nefertiti remains a woman veiled in mystery from the very start. Marriage to Amenhotep IV, or Akhenaten. Nefertiti formally entered history when she became the great royal wife of Amenhotep IV, who would later rename himself Akhenaten. She married him as a young teenager, perhaps at 14 or 15, while he prepared to inherit the throne. But Nefertiti was no ordinary queen. From the beginning of Akhenaten's reign, she appeared beside him in carvings and reliefs, not as a passive consort, but as his near equal. She received the same honors, participated in religious ceremonies, and was shown with her husband beneath the life-giving rays of the sun god Aten. Akhenaten made her more than a companion in ritual. He placed her at the heart of his political and religious revolution. As he broke with the mighty priests of Amun, declaring Aten the sole god, Nefertiti was depicted as Aten's first priestess, offering sacrifices and leading ceremonies. No Egyptian queen before her had been given such a role. Power within the palace. Nefertiti soon became indispensable in the royal court. Historians believe she was critical in helping Akhenaten stabilize his throne during the early years of his radical reforms. For centuries, Egyptians had worshipped a vast pantheon led by Amun of Thebes. Akhenaten shattered this tradition, elevating Aten, the solar disk, as the only source of divine power. It was a religious revolution, but also an economic and political one, stripping Amun's temples of their immense wealth. Nefertiti stood as her husband's strongest ally. She was often depicted with him, arms raised to the sun, receiving Aten's blessings. This was not symbolic decoration, it was a political statement. The entire royal family endorsed the new faith. A new art, a new image. The Amarna period also brought a new artistic style that broke sharply from Egyptian tradition. In this art, royals were portrayed with human warmth and intimate realism. Queens were not frozen in rigid, idealized poses. They were shown with personality, beauty, and individuality. It was within this artistic revolution that the world's most famous image of Nefertiti was created, the painted limestone bust now housed in Berlin. With her graceful features, elongated neck, and striking blue crown, this portrait became an eternal symbol of elegance and refinement. More than an artifact, it became a global icon of beauty itself. Motherhood and family life. Nefertiti bore 6 daughters, all of whom appear in temple and palace reliefs. For the first time in Egyptian art, royal life was depicted with intimacy. Akhenaten and Nefertiti shown playing with their children, embracing them beneath the rays of Aten. These scenes of affection were revolutionary, contrasting with the distant, godlike images of earlier pharaohs. But they also reveal a political problem: no male heir. Despite Akhenaten's secondary wives, no son is clearly attributed to Nefertiti, leaving succession uncertain. At the heart of a revolution. As Akhenaten and Nefertiti moved the capital to their new city, Akhenaten, modern Amarna, their religious reforms intensified. Temples to the old gods were closed, and the vast wealth of Amun's clergy was seized. Nefertiti appeared not as a background figure, but as co-leader of this revolution. She conducted sacrifices, presided over ceremonies, and was even shown in scenes of royal authority once reserved only for kings. Some depictions even show her smiting Egypt's enemies, a role uniquely pharaonic.
Many historians suggest she was not simply Akhenaten's wife, but his political partner and co-ruler. The vanishing queen. And then mystery. Around the 12th year of Akhenaten's reign, Nefertiti vanishes from the records. Theories abound. 1. Early death. Some believe she died of illness or plague, which also claimed one of her daughters. 2. A new identity. Others argue she took on a new name, ruling as the mysterious co-regent Smenkare, possibly even as pharaoh in her own right. 3. Political exile. Another theory is that she was quietly removed from power, though no clear evidence supports this. The lack of inscriptions from Akhenaten's final years make her fate one of history's most enduring enigmas. Egypt in turmoil. While Nefertiti's presence faded, Akhenaten's grip on Egypt weakened. Foreign allies in Canaan and Syria begged for military aid, but the pharaoh was consumed by his devotion to Aten. Egypt's power abroad dwindled, and at home, resentment grew. If Nefertiti was still alive, she may have been the stabilizing force attempting to balance faith with statecraft. But history leaves us no answers. After Akhenaten. When Akhenaten died around 1336 BCE, chaos followed. The throne briefly passed to the shadowy Smenkare, then to the boy king Tutankhaten, better known as Tutankhamun, who soon restored the worship of Amun and abandoned Akhenaten. Where was Nefertiti during this transition? Was she already dead? Was she Smenkare? Or did she work quietly behind the scenes to ensure Egypt's survival? We may never know. The lost tomb. One of the greatest unsolved mysteries is Nefertiti's burial place. Unlike other queens, no definitive tomb has been found. In 2015, Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves proposed that her burial chamber lies hidden behind the walls of Tutankhamun's tomb in the Valley of the Kings. Scans revealed anomalies that may conceal hidden chambers. If true, it could be one of the most extraordinary discoveries in modern archaeology. Legacy of a queen. Through it all, Nefertiti endures as more than a historical figure. She is an icon of beauty, power, and mystery. The Berlin bust, crafted in the workshop of the sculptor Thutmose over 3,000 years ago, ensures her face remains one of the most recognizable in history. Her story, half history, half enigma, continues to fascinate, reminding us that some lives shine so brightly their light never fades. It is not merely a work of art, but a testament to a woman who combined beauty and power, religious and political presence, femininity and leadership. In modern studies, some scholars regard her as the first queen actively participating in governance in ancient Egypt, while others see her as the originator of a spiritual revolution that ultimately did not succeed. Yet what is certain is that she left an indelible mark, even more than 3,000 years after her death. Nefertiti, between legend and reality. Her character, woman and queen. When we contemplate Nefertiti's persona portrayed in inscriptions and artifacts, we encounter a woman of dual dimensions. On one hand, a mother and wife, on the other, a political and religious leader. This duality was uncommon in ancient Egypt, where queens often remained shadows of the pharaoh, participating in ceremonies and rituals, but rarely wielding real authority. Nefertiti reversed this equation. She retained the role of nurturing mother and supportive wife, as seen in murals depicting her with her daughters and husband, yet she simultaneously appeared in positions of royal power, striking enemies or offering sacrifices to the god Aten. This ability to merge femininity with leadership made her an exceptional figure in ancient Egyptian history. Her personality was marked by courage and the ability to face the unknown. It was no simple feat to place herself at the center of a religious revolution that shook the foundations of traditional Egyptian beliefs. Yet she did so, standing beside Akhenaten in defiance of the priests of Amun and their followers. Her influence on Egyptian art. One of Nefertiti's most significant legacies lies in Amarna art, also called Akhenaten's art. During this relatively brief era, Egypt witnessed an unprecedented transformation in artistic expression. Before Amarna, Egyptian art was rigid and strictly rule-bound. The pharaoh was depicted larger than others with idealized features. The queen always stood behind or beside him in a subordinate posture. But with Nefertiti and Akhenaten, these rules were overturned. In Amarna reliefs, the queen is shown sitting alongside the pharaoh on equal footing. The king is seen kissing his child. The queen is depicted presenting offerings herself. These small details carried a major intellectual revolution. Humanity entered royal art, and the royal family was depicted as human beings with emotions and sentiments, not merely frozen symbols.
The famous bust of Nefertiti exemplifies this transformation. She is portrayed with astonishing realism. A long, graceful neck, balanced features, and wide eyes gazing toward eternity. This work was not merely a portrait of a queen, but the embodiment of beauty and immortality together. Nefertiti and Egyptian thought. Her influence extended beyond art to religious and political thought. She was a key pillar of Akhenaten's project to unify worship under one god, Aten. Although this revolution was short-lived, it left a lasting impact on the history of ideas. It was the first attempt in Egyptian history to move people from religious plurality to a form of monotheism. This approach preceded later religions that would embrace the concept of a single deity. Some scholars argue that Nefertiti may have been the mastermind or principal supporter of this ideology. Akhenaten was deeply absorbed in religious contemplation, possibly needing a practical partner to help manage the state and stabilize the new doctrine. Here, Nefertiti emerged, a woman unafraid of ambition, embodying these ideas in her daily life and public rituals. Her relationship with Tutankhamun. After Akhenaten's death, the child Tutankhaten, later Tutankhamun, ascended to the throne. This was an extremely sensitive period. Egypt was in political and religious turmoil, and the new pharaoh was barely 10 years old. This raises an important question. Did Nefertiti play a role in raising this young king? If she was still alive, she likely played a central role in her tutelage. As the great royal wife with extensive political experience, she would have been the most qualified candidate to act as regent during the early years of Tutankhamun's reign. However, with the restoration of Amun worship, Nefertiti may have been gradually marginalized in favor of new court figures like A and Horemheb. This adds to the mystery. While we know much about A and Horemheb, Nefertiti's story remains elusive, as if deliberately erased from the records. Nefertiti in the eyes of ancient historians. Interestingly, ancient Egyptian sources after Akhenaten almost entirely omitted mention of Nefertiti. Following the revival of Amun worship, the period of Akhenaten and Nefertiti was treated as a time of sin that should be erased from memory. The priests, having reclaimed power, sought to obliterate the traces of Amarna,
erasing the names of Akhenaten and his followers from inscriptions. Thus, Nefertiti disappeared from the official historical record for centuries. Yet some artifacts, such as the famous bust, survived to remind later generations of her beauty and power. Her rediscovery in modern times. In the early 20th century, the world witnessed the revival of Nefertiti's name. In 1912, German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt discovered her bust in the workshop of the sculptor Thutmose at Amarna. The discovery caused a global sensation as the bust seemed freshly made, with beauty unspoiled despite over 3,000 years. Since then, Nefertiti's name has become synonymous with ancient Egyptian beauty, and her image has filled books, museums, and advertisements. Germany, as Egypt repeatedly claimed that the statue had been removed illegally during excavations. This ongoing debate adds to Nefertiti's symbolism as an icon of both cultural achievement and contested heritage. Nefertiti in modern studies. Today, Egyptologists view her from multiple perspectives. 1. Political scholars see her as a powerful woman who may have ruled after Akhenaten's death. 2. Religious scholars consider her a symbol of Egypt's first monotheistic attempt. 3. Art historians view her as an inspiration who transformed Egyptian art and introduced realism. 4. Archaeologists continue searching for her missing tomb, which, if found, could reveal immense secrets about the Amarna period. An endless legend. Remarkably, despite all the mystery surrounding her, Nefertiti remains a global symbol of beauty, femininity, and strength. She is not merely an ancient queen, but an enduring image that inspires literature, art, and cinema to this day. She has evolved from a historical figure to a cultural legend. In novels, films, and artworks, she is repeatedly imagined as an enchanting queen, a mysterious priestess, or even a guardian of Egypt's ancient secrets. Nefertiti, a legacy across ages. Her civilizational legacy. Looking at ancient Egypt, many kings and queens left great monuments, yet their names faded from history. Nefertiti, despite fewer surviving artifacts, remains vivid in memory. The secret lies not only in her beauty, but in her symbolism as a woman who defied convention. She proved that authority is not exclusive to men, and that women can lead and influence politics, religion, and thought. She embodied Egypt itself, strong, beautiful, mysterious, and eternal. Just as Egypt's civilization endures, Nefertiti's name continues to shine in the annals of history.
Her presence in human consciousness. In the modern Western imagination, Nefertiti is associated with idealized beauty, becoming an icon transcending Egypt. Her sculpted bust in Berlin has become a global standard of classical beauty, displayed in museums and studied in art books. In Arab and Egyptian consciousness, she represents pride and ancient Egyptian identity. Whenever her name is mentioned, it evokes the greatness of Egypt's women who shaped history. She is an example of Egypt's civilization transcending time, a queen who lived over 3,000 years ago, yet still inspires artists, thinkers, and writers today. Why she remains immortal? One might ask, why has Nefertiti endured while other queens were forgotten? The answer lies in several factors. 1. Mystery. Her sudden disappearance and unknown tomb add an aura of secrecy, fueling endless research and imagination. 2. Art. The bust portraying her eternal beauty preserved her visual presence. 3. Political and religious role. Her name is tied to a major intellectual revolution, making her more than just a beautiful queen. 4. Cultural symbolism. She became a symbol of femininity and power, a rare combination in historical figures. Nefertiti and immortality. Perhaps Nefertiti never sought to be remembered after millennia. Perhaps her main goal was to preserve Akhenaten's religious revolution and leave her daughters a legacy of royal pride. Yet fate made her immortal, not just as a king's wife, but as a human figure who captured hearts across ages. Nefertiti, the beautiful one has come, continues to reach us every day through history books, exhibitions, and the dreams of those searching for her tomb. Conclusion. Nefertiti's life is the story of a woman who transcended her time and place to become a human icon beyond all ages. She was a queen, a wife, a mother, a political actor, a religious inspiration, and an artistic legend. This multiplicity of roles made her an enduring enigma, never exhausted no matter how much is written or said. Even if history tried to close her chapter after the fall of Amarna, the present has vindicated her by bringing her back into the spotlight. New generations continue to discover in her story the inspiration that women can shape history, that beauty and power are inseparable, and that true legacy cannot be erased by time. Thus, Nefertiti, the beautiful one has come, remains among us, as if she never left Amarna at all, still sitting in her palace, gazing with her wide eyes into eternity.
The second story, Cleopatra, the queen of magic, desire, and beauty.
Cleopatra's Spell, a saga of love and power. Alexandria, the heart of the ancient world. It was the year 51 BC, and Alexandria shimmered beneath the blazing Mediterranean sun. The Ptolemaic palace rose proudly above the city, its white marble columns gleaming, its mosaic walls sparkling like jewels, an enduring monument to a dynasty that had ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years. On the throne sat Cleopatra VII, just 21 years old, beside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, a boy of 10. But Alexandria was more than a royal seat. It was the crossroads of the world, where Greek philosophy blended with Egyptian rituals and cultures collided to create something extraordinary. The great library, housing hundreds of thousands of scrolls, was the beacon of knowledge, and Cleopatra herself, fluent in 9 languages, from Greek and Latin to the ancient tongue of Egypt, was its living embodiment. Her beauty, historians said, was not simply in her face. Plutarch described her eyes as alive with intelligence and defiance, and her voice as a melody, soft, captivating, unforgettable. Yet behind that charm stood a queen who knew the truth. Egypt's grain and gold made her land Rome's greatest prize, and in a world ruled by men, Cleopatra's mind and cunning were her strongest weapons. Life in Alexandria. The city pulsed with life. White stone streets thrived with merchants, silks from China, spices from India, jewels from Nubia. The harbor filled with giant ships bound for Rome, their holds heavy with Egyptian grain. Temples to Isis and Serapis overflowed with worshippers, incense, and chants. Inside the palace, life was a world of its own. Halls glittering with gold, gardens lush with palms and rare flowers, chambers filled with Greek statues and scrolls. Raised in this luxury, Cleopatra mastered the art of blending Greek refinement with Egyptian soul. She embraced the role of Isis incarnate, the goddess of wisdom and motherhood, presenting herself as both mortal queen and divine being. Shadows of civil war. By 48 BC, Egypt trembled on the edge of chaos. Her brother, Ptolemy XIII, guided by ruthless advisors, Pothinus, the scheming eunuch, and Achilles, the commander of the army, seized the throne, forcing Cleopatra into exile. She withdrew to the deserts near Sinai, but this was no defeat. She gathered mercenaries, loyalists, and her resolve to return stronger. Then came the news Julius Caesar, fresh from crushing Pompey at Pharsalus, had arrived in Alexandria to decide the fate of Egypt's crown. Cleopatra knew this was her chance. But the palace was sealed by Ptolemy's guards. To reach Caesar was impossible, unless she made it possible. On a moonless night, Cleopatra wrapped herself in a rug, entrusted herself to her loyal servant Apollodorus, and was carried through enemy lines into Caesar's chambers. When the rug was unrolled, she rose before him, draped in silk embroidered with gold, her dark hair falling like a river over her shoulders, her eyes gleaming in torchlight. "Great general," she whispered, her voice carrying like music. Egypt is not just a land of grain. It is the very heart of civilization. Help me reclaim my throne, and Rome will share in its wealth and glory. Caesar, then 52, had seen ambition in many forms, but nothing like her. She spoke fluent Latin, quoted Aristotle and Homer, recalled the history of her Ptolemaic ancestors. She was no desperate queen begging for aid. She was an equal, a partner, a force, and soon she became far more. The first meeting. That night, Cleopatra welcomed Caesar to a private feast. Tables overflowed with Egyptian delicacies, bread baked from Nile wheat, grapes from the Delta, wines aged in Mareotes. As they dined, she spoke of her vision for Egypt, her dream of a partnership with Rome that would bind East and West together. Caesar, long accustomed to Roman women hidden in the shadows, found himself staring at a queen unafraid to meet him eye to eye. "Why should I trust you?" Caesar asked, his gaze fixed on her. "Because, Caesar," she answered with a faint, knowing smile, "you are a man who understands power, and I am a woman who knows how to hold it." That night, history shifted. Caesar chose her, not only for politics, not only for Egypt's grain, but because she awakened in him a fire he had never known. The Nile and the birth of Caesarion. Months of conflict followed. At last, Caesar's forces triumphed at the Battle of the Nile in 47 BC. Ptolemy XIII drowned as he fled, and Cleopatra emerged as Egypt's sovereign queen, with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, as ceremonial co-ruler. Her bond with Caesar deepened. Together they sailed the Nile on a royal barge adorned in gold and purple, a journey lasting months. Along the riverbanks, farmers cheered their queen. They visited the temples of Thebes, the timeless pyramids of Giza, villages alive with history and memory. During this voyage, Cleopatra bore Caesar a son, Ptolemy Caesarion, known as Caesarion. He was the living emblem of two worlds, heir to both Egypt and Rome. Cleopatra envisioned him as the king who would unite East and West. Caesar, bound by marriage to Calpurnia, never officially recognized him, but the child's existence alone altered the course of destiny. Life in Alexandria. The palace was alive with politics and splendor. Cleopatra surrounded herself with scholars, priests, and advisors. She invited the great minds of the library to debate mathematics and astronomy. She performed the rituals of Isis before her people, wearing the goddess's crown with divine authority. She dressed in sheer linen gowns that shimmered in sunlight, her body adorned with jewels that blazed like fire. She ruled as both queen and goddess, both woman and myth. But challenges pressed upon her. Famine struck with weak Nile floods. Cleopatra carefully managed the economy, ensuring Rome's grain supply remained steady, keeping Caesar's alliance strong. Yet she knew storms were rising. In Rome, the Senate feared Caesar's growing power. Enemies plotted, and soon those storms would reach Egypt. Rome and controversy. In 46 BC, Julius Caesar extended a personal invitation to Cleopatra. She arrived in Rome with a royal fleet, draped in gold-embroidered Egyptian silks, accompanied by her son Caesarion and a retinue that reflected her power. She stayed in Caesar's villa along the Tiber, hosting extravagant feasts that left Rome's elite both enchanted and scandalized. Egyptian wines flowed, Eastern music filled the halls, and Greek poetry echoed through the rooms. Cleopatra had become both a marvel and a source of gossip. Her presence ignited outrage. Romans whispered of the seductive Easterner who held Caesar in her thrall. Rumors of a possible marriage threatened to destabilize his political standing. Yet Cleopatra, fully aware of the tension, continued to exert her influence, engaging senators in political debate and demonstrating her extraordinary knowledge of the world. Then came March of 44 BC, and the world shifted. Caesar was assassinated in the Senate by Brutus, Cassius, and a coalition of conspirators claiming to save the Republic. Cleopatra recognized immediately that remaining in Rome was dangerous. She gathered her entourage, took Caesarion in her arms, and sailed back to Alexandria, carrying not only her son, but a profound fear for Egypt's future. Alexandria's donations and tensions with Rome, Eastern ambitions. By 37 BC, Cleopatra's alliance with Mark Antony had solidified into an unbreakable bond. She provided him with ships, soldiers, and funds for campaigns against the Parthians, though these efforts met with mixed results. Antony spent much of his time in Alexandria, far from Rome, stirring anger in Octavian, who was consolidating his power in the west. In 34 BC, Antony and Cleopatra made a bold statement with the donations of Alexandria. Held in a grand hall of the Ptolemaic palace, adorned with marble columns and silk drapes, the ceremony brought together Egypt's elite, military leaders, and advisors. On a raised platform, Antony and Cleopatra stood in regal attire that radiated authority. Antony declared Cleopatra Queen of Kings and recognized her son, Caesarion, as Julius Caesar's legitimate heir. Their children were granted vast territories. Alexander Helios received Armenia and Media. Cleopatra Selene received Cyprus and Libya. And Ptolemy Philadelphus, born in 36 BC, was granted Syria and Asia Minor. Recorded by historians Plutarch and Cassius Dio, this declaration challenged Octavian directly. Cleopatra sought to establish a powerful Eastern empire under her children's rule. In Rome, Octavian spun the event as propaganda, portraying Cleopatra as a greedy, manipulative queen and Antony as a man ensnared by her allure. The campaign worked. Romans viewed the East as decadent and corrupt, suspicious of its influence. Life in Rome.
Life in Rome. Rome, unlike Alexandria, was a city of noise, dust, and tension. Narrow streets clattered with horse-drawn carts, vendors shouted their wares, and the forum was alive with political debates over the Republic's fate. Temples to Jupiter and Mars served as centers of worship, though they lacked the grandeur of Alexandria's shrines to Isis and Serapis. Octavia, Antony's Roman wife, was beloved for her humility, her devotion to family, and as Octavian's sister. Antony's partnership with Cleopatra and the donations of Alexandria made him appear a traitor in many Roman eyes. Cleopatra understood these dangers. In letters to her advisors, she emphasized the need to strengthen Egypt's military and economy. She oversaw the construction of new ships, managed the grain harvests, and ensured Rome's continued reliance on Egypt's resources. Meanwhile, she and Antony planned campaigns against the Parthians, hoping military victories would secure their position and assert Egypt's dominance in the East. Internal struggles. In Alexandria, challenges never ceased. Egypt's priests and nobles watched Cleopatra closely, some whispering that her alliance with Mark Antony was reckless, that it risks drawing Rome's fury and conquest upon their land. To strengthen her legitimacy, Cleopatra embraced the image of Isis, appearing in temples dressed as the goddess herself, offering rituals and gifts to her people. She managed the kingdom's economy with sharp precision, drawing on hard-won experience from years of weak Nile floods. One quiet night, as she walked through the palace gardens beside Antony, she confessed her fears. Gazing up at the stars glittering above Alexandria, she said softly, "Rome does not trust me, Antony. They don't see that Egypt keeps their empire steady. If we fall, Rome will lose more than it can imagine." Antony clasped her hand and answered with certainty, "We won't lose. Together, we'll build an empire Octavian can only dream of." But even as they spoke of destiny, Octavian was moving. He wielded propaganda like a weapon, stoking Roman hatred of Cleopatra and preparing for the final confrontation. The road to Actium, Rising tensions with Octavian. After the donations of Alexandria in 34 BC, war with Octavian became inevitable. Cleopatra had declared herself Queen of Kings, with her children ruling vast eastern territories, a vision that enraged Rome. Octavian, just 29 years old but ruthless and calculating, launched a propaganda campaign that painted Cleopatra as a dangerous eastern temptress and Antony as her puppet. The story found fertile ground in Rome, especially since Antony was married to Octavia, Octavian's sister, beloved for her dignity and loyalty. From Alexandria, Cleopatra kept watch. Spies and messengers carried news daily into her throne room. Seated in regal linen embroidered with gold and pearls, crowned with the emblem of Isis, she addressed her advisors, among them Apollodorus and her astronomer Sosigenes. Octavian plays the game of propaganda, she told them, her voice steady. But he underestimates Egypt's strength. Our grain keeps Rome alive. If we withhold it, his empire crumbles. Even with weak Nile floods, she expanded irrigation channels, stockpiled grain, and ensured her fleet, a dazzling armada of 200 ships, their prows carved and gilded, ready to face Rome. By 32 BC, Octavian made his move. He declared war not on Antony, but directly on Cleopatra, framing her as the true enemy of Rome. In the Senate, he revealed Antony's will, stolen by a traitor, which confirmed Caesarion as Caesar's heir and granted vast territories to Cleopatra's children. Reading it aloud, Octavian inflamed Roman outrage, portraying Antony as a man who had betrayed Rome for an Eastern queen. In Alexandria, Cleopatra and Antony gathered their forces, planning to confront Octavian in western Greece near the Bay of Actium. Their combined armies were vast. Egyptian, Roman, and mercenary troops stood under their banners, while Cleopatra's fleet was the heart of their strength. In her palace by the sea, she met with commanders discussing provisions and strategy. One evening, overlooking Alexandria's glowing harbor, she raised a goblet of Egyptian wine and told Antony with fierce resolve, "Octavian bets on our weakness, but he does not know the power of our fleet. If we triumph at Actium, Rome itself will bow to us." Exhausted by politics and war, Antony looked at her in admiration. "You are the soul of this alliance, Cleopatra. Without you, I would not dare dream of victory." But even as they spoke of destiny, cracks appeared. Some of Antony's commanders, like Ahenobarbos, doubted Cleopatra's role in battle, fearing her presence would undermine Roman confidence. Friction grew between Egyptian and Roman soldiers, their cultures clashing in the camps. But Cleopatra would not allow division. She personally hosted feasts for the commanders, distributed lavish gifts, and reminded them all that the survival of their cause rested on unity. Life in the camp. In the spring of 31 BC, Cleopatra and Mark Antony moved their armies to the Bay of Actium, a narrow stretch of water flanked by steep hills, perfect for a naval defense. Their sprawling camp was alive with banners, Roman eagles standing beside Egyptian cobras. Along the blue waters, Cleopatra's fleet glittered in the sun. She walked the docks in light armor etched with Egyptian symbols, speaking to sailors in their own tongues to win loyalty. Her flagship, the Antonius, was a floating marvel with rows of oars moving in rhythm beneath purple sails. Life in the camp was a strange mix of tension and splendor. By day, Antony's generals debated strategies, and at night, Cleopatra hosted feasts inside her lavish tent. Tables groaned with roasted meats, fresh bread from Nile wheat, and spiced wines. Musicians played soft melodies, while Cleopatra and Antony whispered about the coming battle. Yet unease lingered. Commanders like Ahenobarbos abandoned them, defecting to Octavian's side and cutting deep into morale. The Battle of Actium. On September 2, 31 BC, the war came to its climax. The fleets of Antony and Cleopatra clashed with Octavian's, commanded by the brilliant Agrippa. Octavian's ships were smaller, lighter, and faster, darting like wolves around Antony's heavy vessels. By mid-morning, Cleopatra stood on the deck of the Antonius, dressed in armor, but crowned as a queen, her eyes fixed on the chaos. The tide of battle shifted. Roman firepower shredded their lines. Realizing defeat was near, Cleopatra made a fateful decision. According to Cassius Dio, she signaled retreat, escaping southward with 60 ships to preserve what forces remained.
When Antony saw her purple sails leaving the fight, he made a disastrous choice. He abandoned his command and followed her in a small boat. Plutarch calls this moment the breaking of Antony's army. Confusion spread, and the rest of their fleet fell into chaos. Men surrendered in droves. Actium was lost. Return to Alexandria. Antony and Cleopatra fled back to Alexandria, broken and in despair. Though the city still pulsed with trade and music, the palace was heavy with silence. One night, Cleopatra sat in the garden overlooking the Mediterranean. She gripped Antony's hand and whispered, "We are not defeated yet. We still have Egypt, our grain, our people. We can negotiate with Octavian." But Antony shook his head, bitter and betrayed by the defections of his generals. Octavian does not negotiate. He will settle for nothing less than Rome's total victory. Cleopatra knew their options were fading. In secret, she sent envoys to Octavian, offering to step aside if he would spare Caesarion and her other children. Octavian, however, already planned to make Egypt a Roman province. His replies were cold, evasive. Life in Alexandria after defeat. Despite the looming shadow of war, Cleopatra worked to preserve an image of strength. Alexandria remained vibrant, markets bustled with voices, temples thrummed with incense and prayers. Scholars debated in the great library. In the palace, she continued to host philosophers and poets, reminding her people that Egypt's queen still stood. But rumors whispered through the streets. Octavian was coming. Cleopatra began to prepare for the inevitable. Near the temple of Isis, she built a magnificent mausoleum, stocking it with her treasures, scrolls, and jewels. It was not just a tomb, but a message. If she could not rule Egypt, she would at least control her own ending. Daily life in Alexandria. Alexandria in Cleopatra's age was one of the world's greatest cities, a crossroads where Greek, Egyptian, and Eastern cultures collided. It was a city of marble colonnades and bustling harbors, of sacred processions and rowdy taverns, of scholars and merchants alike. The markets. At dawn, the agora, the central marketplace, came alive. Wide stone streets filled with merchants from across the known world. Traders from China offered bolts of silk in brilliant reds and blues, while Indian caravans brought cinnamon, ginger, and pepper. From Nubia came ivory and gold, from Greece fine olive oils, and from Egypt linen so soft it was prized by kings. The air was a symphony of smells and sounds. Fresh bread from stone ovens, grilled fish from the harbor, roasted lamb with herbs from far-off lands. Vendors shouted, "Spices of India to make your dishes sing," and "Silk from the East, fit for a queen." Children darted between carts, women haggled fiercely, and priests wandered among the stalls, inspecting offerings for their temples. Sometimes Cleopatra herself slipped among the crowds in disguise, cloaked in plain cloth. She checked grain prices, asked questions, and watched her people with sharp eyes. To her, the marketplace was not just commerce, it was the heartbeat of her kingdom, proof of Egypt's wealth and resilience. Isis rituals. Religion was woven into daily life, and no deity was more beloved than Isis, goddess of motherhood, magic, and rebirth. Her grand temple in Rhodotis was a place of constant worship. Here, Cleopatra embodied the goddess herself. Wearing flowing white linen threaded with gold, crowned with horns at a solar disk, she played the role of the living Isis. The temple rose in white limestone, its towering columns carved with the story of Isis and Osiris. Inside, incense curled upward as priests in white robes chanted ancient hymns. The black marble statue of Isis, cradling the infant Horus, glittered with inlaid lapis eyes under torchlight. To the sound of flutes and lyres, Cleopatra entered with offerings: lotus flowers for rebirth, grains from the Nile for prosperity, and bread baked in sacred ovens. Priests intoned blessings: "O Isis, mother of the world, protect our queen," as Cleopatra knelt, embodying divinity itself. For her people, she was no mere monarch. She was Isis reborn, guardian of Egypt in its most perilous hour. The feasts. Lavish feasts were a jewel of Ptolemaic palace life, especially during Cleopatra's years with Antony. Plutarch describes these banquets as theaters of power, where Egypt displayed its wealth to awe allies and rivals alike. The palace halls glowed with spectacle. Purple silks draped the walls, golden embroidered linens covered endless tables. The menu was a wonder of the world. Rare Asian peacocks roasted whole, stuffed with almonds and Indian spices. Venison seasoned with black pepper and ginger from far-off lands. Mariotis wine, born from vineyards near Alexandria, was poured into emerald-studded goblets. Its rich fragrance hung in the air. Baskets of ripe figs and green grapes glittered in gold, while honey almond sweets shaped like the wedget eye carried symbols of protection and eternity. Dancers in sheer gowns moved gracefully, their steps drawn from Isis rituals, telling stories of divine motherhood and rebirth. Flutes and lyres wove gentle rhythms, joined by the deeper beat of Egyptian drums. Cleopatra sat at Antony's side, their laughter echoing beneath the high arches. Guests feasted until dawn, leaving with gifts of gold and ivory, tokens of loyalty and reminders of Egypt's cultural supremacy. The Great Library. At the heart of Alexandria stood the Great Library, founded by Ptolemy I, home to some 700,000 scrolls. It was a temple of knowledge, a place where the world's wisdom was gathered. Cleopatra visited often, her mind as hungry as any scholar's. There she debated with Sosigenes, the astronomer who advised Julius Caesar on his calendar reforms. Surrounded by shelves of papyrus scrolls, Cleopatra leaned close and asked, "Tell me, how does the moon shape the floods of the Nile?" With precise models, Sosigenes explained the cycles of sun and moon, knowledge she would later use to predict harvests and strengthen Egypt's agriculture. In those quiet halls, Euclid's geometry was debated, Aristarch's astronomy challenged, and new ideas took shape. Cleopatra not only absorbed knowledge, but funded the library's mission to collect manuscripts from across the known world.
Supporting figures and hidden conflicts. Cleopatra's destiny was shaped not by her alone, but by the figures orbiting her throne, each carrying ambition, loyalty, or betrayal. Octavian, the cold strategist. In Rome, Octavian, Julius Caesar's grandnephew, moved his pieces with ruthless calculation. Just 29 at the height of his struggle with Antony, he sought to tear down their alliance. He lured defectors like Ahenobarbus, disillusioned with Cleopatra's power, and wielded Antony's will as a weapon. Reading it before the Senate, Octavian painted Antony as a traitor who bowed to Egypt, granting lands to Cleopatra's children and naming Caesarion as Caesar's heir. With this, he rallied Rome to war. Octavia, the forgotten wife. Octavia, Antony's Roman wife and Octavian's sister, was the picture of virtue. In Plutarch's account, she sent Antony letters heavy with sorrow, pleading for his return. After his and Cleopatra's deaths, she became guardian of their 3 children, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus. She later arranged Selene's marriage to Juba II of Murania, showing humanity amid the bitterness of empire. Apollodorus and the Handmaidens.
At Cleopatra's side stood Apollodorus, her loyal Sicilian attendant. He organized feasts, carried her letters to Octavian, and remained with her until the very end in the mausoleum. Her handmaidens, Iris and Charmian, were her shadows, guardians of her wardrobe, jewels, and dignity. In her final moments, it was they who prepared the poison, choosing to die with her rather than live without her. Palace intrigues. From her youth, Cleopatra navigated daggers in the dark. Advisors like Pothinus and Achillas plotted to oust her in favor of her brother, Ptolemy XIII. With wit and daring, she smuggled herself to Caesar, wrapped in a carpet, winning his protection. Pothinus was executed, Achillas defeated at the Nile. Survival had always been her art. Economic trials. Egypt's wealth was vast but fragile. Poor Nile floods threatened famine. Cleopatra countered with irrigation channels in the delta, distributing stored grain to the hungry. Trade taxes filled her coffers, keeping her people fed and her rule secure, even as Rome's shadow grew longer. The mausoleum. Near the Temple of Isis, Cleopatra built her final refuge, a mausoleum of white marble. Statues of Isis and Osiris guarded its gates, while walls carved with hieroglyphs told her life story. Inside, treasures gleamed, gold necklaces, ivory statues, scrolls of wisdom. Surrounded by fountains and gardens, it was a sanctuary, but also a statement. If she could not defeat Rome, she would at least dictate her ending. The final moments. August 30 BC. The end had come. In her mausoleum, Cleopatra sat upon her throne, robed in royal purple, crown upon her brow. Iris and Charmian stood close, their faces pale but resolute. "Is the venom ready?" Cleopatra asked. "Yes, my queen," Iris whispered. "The asp awaits." Charmian adjusted her crown and murmured, "You shall remain a queen until the very last." Cleopatra wrote her final letter to Octavian, "Bury me beside Antony, spare my children." Then, taking the cobra, the sacred asp of Isis, she held it to her arm. Its fangs struck. The venom spread like fire, but her face remained serene. Cleopatra, last queen of Egypt, died as she had lived, in control of her destiny. Her handmaidens followed her into death, faithful even in the final silence. The aftermath. Cleopatra's death sent shockwaves through Egypt. Small rebellions flared in the delta, but were swiftly crushed. Octavian marched into Alexandria, claiming the land as Rome's new jewel. Egypt's treasures and grain would now fuel an empire. Caesarion, her son by Julius Caesar, was executed, too dangerous a rival for Rome. Her other children were spared, carried to Rome, where Octavia raised them. Cleopatra Selene grew to marry Juba II of Murania, ruling in distant Murania. But her brothers, Alexander Helios and Ptolemy Philadelphus, faded from history, dying young in Rome's shadow. The dynasty of the Ptolemies was gone. With Cleopatra's death, the age of pharaohs ended, and Egypt became a province of Rome. Yet her legend, queen, lover, goddess, endured. A story of brilliance, defiance, and a woman who dared to fight an empire.